Former Federal Reserve Chairman Paul Volcker has a new mission. He wants to try to restore trust in government. He joins me now following a speech at the Economic Club of New York. Very good to see you here.
Thank you.
You are starting a foundation called the Volcker Alliance. Restoring trust in government is something...
Make our little contribution anyway.
You're still working, and that's great. What's going to be harder? Restoring trust in government, is that harder or easier than fighting inflation, something you've experienced with?
Fighting inflation is probably easier than restoring trust. We have a very difficult situation in this country. It's not just in this country, but there has been erosion of trust in government in recent years, and it's pretty much at a low level. You ask a very simple question. Do you trust your government to do the right thing most of the time? Question that's been asked for 20, 30 years. Less than 20% of the people now say yes, they trust their government. That's not a very hearty endorsement of our democracy. And there are a lot of reasons for it. But our theory, our approach is, what you think of as the nuts and bolts. How do you carry out the goals of government? Politicians are going to set the goal, the people are going to set the goals. But it's got to be executed, it's got to be implemented efficiently. And if it's not, people get cynical and say, what's the matter with the government?
Do you hope that the Alliance will facilitate some of the proposals from Dodd-Frank, including the Volcker Rule, which have never been really fully implemented?
Well, the only thing that is relation to Dodd-Frank, and what I spoke about today is, we have a lot of regulatory agencies in the United States. We have too many cooks are spoiling the broth. And it shouldn't take 3 years to write the regulations to fully implement Dodd-Frank. This is an example of what we are after. It's been ineffective to have that many organizations. It's been a problem for a long time, but it's an acute problem now. And can something to be done to reorganize the regulatory agencies? I think there are too many. I begin with the bias of too many. You don't need 6 or 7. You probably need more than 1. But there's a lot of room between 1 and 6. So that's actually, people have come to us and said, foundations come to us and say, we'll finance work in this area. So we'll take that on.
You also spoke a bit about the Federal Reserve. While you were speaking, Boston Fed President Eric Rosengren said a modest cut might make sense in QE, in the bond buying, over the next few months. Would you agree?
Well, I'm not going to comment on that. I try to stay away from comments on current Federal Reserve stuff. That's their responsibility. I did refer to the fact that they have a challenge of, more than refer, they've got a challenge of moving from this heavy intervention they have now and doing it in a way that's orderly and smooth over a period of time. And I said, I think they can do that. They've got the tools to do that. When to do it, just how to do it, it's their responsibility.
What signs should investors look for before the Fed does indeed pull back? Because this is what we know we'll hear for months, speculation.
I'm not going to give you all those clues as to how investor guys can outguess the market. They're going to have to make their own judgment. It obviously depends upon a judgment as to whether the economic recovery is self-sustaining at a reasonable rate of speed, and that we always have to keep our eye on price stability. The speech I made was basically a great screed about the importance of maintaining price stability if you're a central bank. That's a principal responsibility. So if these easy money policies begin to jeopardize that, then they got a question.
You made some other very interesting comments, actually. I want to quote right from your speech. You talked about when the Federal Reserve has to accommodate too much, and that includes misguided fiscal policies, dealing with structural imbalances, inevitably it will fall short. So I guess the concern is that the situation we're in now, that the Fed is being asked to do much?
Yeah,
and what does that mean, fall short?
I think de facto they are being asked to do too much. And particularly, I'm not sure that fiscal policy is well aligned what it should be doing. But the Federal Reserve is now supporting the mortgage market together with the government. That is not traditionally a function of the central bank to be supporting one particular sector of the market. It happens to be a very important sector. And they're doing it for obvious reasons. It was very depressed and they're looking for levers. But that's, we shouldn't ask the Federal Reserve to be managing the mortgage market or managing other markets. They manage the amount of liquidity in the economy. It has an influence on interest rates for everybody. But a fundamental responsibility is not to pay attention to particular parts of the economy, because that's going to get them in trouble.
Well, what do you mean by that? I mean, I guess what concerns me is this inevitably it will fall short.
Yeah, well,
so we won't stimulate the economy, or inflation will be a problem?
One or two things. They will be asked, people think there's this great magic machine that can create whatever they want to create. And then if it doesn't happen, they say, what's the matter? We better do something about this agency. They're not doing their job. Well, people should understand their job has its limitations. That's one risk. The other risk is that trying to intervene, then they do get into political issues. And people say, why are you supporting that market and not this market? And are you helping the rich and not helping the poor? And all kinds of questions arise.
You also raised the issue of credibility, and you mentioned inflation is very hard to fight, and obviously that's not something we're talking about or thinking about. Should we be thinking more about that right now?
Well, I think we are thinking about it, fortunately. So far, I think, and the Federal Reserve keeps saying this, that we're at a position where the inflationary pressures are not present in any strong way. We got a lot of unemployment, we have wages under control and so forth. But that's the way we want to keep it, that inflation is not an issue. And they've got to be careful to maintain that.
Do you think we will ever see the situation you were faced with in terms of inflation? Or has the central bank grown and learned?
We have to face again the situation I faced, and it's a failure. We don't want another failure.
And the Federal Reserve is one agency you think should remain regulatory agency, but you're not a fan of the dual mandate.
No, I think it's confusing, as I said. That's a case where the Federal Reserve is asked to do too much. The economy has its ups and downs in ways that are not easily controllable or should be controllable by monetary policy. If people keep thinking that every fluctuation in the economy is the responsibility of the Federal Reserve, they're going to get in trouble. The most important thing is people used to think that if we had little inflation, it was good for business. It would help business expansion. That view has been pretty well shattered, theoretically and practically. And I don't want to see it come back, because that's what happened when we got in the problem in the 70s.
Let me ask you one other question. I'm not sure if you'll go there, but I'll ask anyway. Any thoughts on what we're seeing in Japan right now?
Well, Japan is struggling with this. I think Japan's got kind of a bad rap. The economy has not been doing very well, but no economy around the world has been doing all that well. And people kind of forget that the population of Japan is declining and the labor force is declining. When you adjust for that, their record doesn't look quite as bad as people are always talking about.
Will they be successful, the central bank?
I think they may be going too far and promising things that they can't produce. But the new prime minister is a little more modest in his demands than when he was in the campaign, which I think is a good thing.
Former Federal Reserve Chairman Paul Volcker, thank you so much. I'm Rhonda Schaffler. This is Reuters.